Welcome to Tech Yes, where tech makes sense. On this podcast, we discuss good products and good practice to make tech more human. I'm Dane, and I'm joined today by my friend Alex.
Hi, Dane.
Hi, Alex. Today we'll be discussing why your next computer should be an iPad Pro.
Or should it?
Yeah, see, now that's the question. I'm glad you bring that up, Alex. So, Alex, tell me a little bit about who you are, so our listeners know who you are.
Excellent. Yeah, I am a digital marketer, and I'm also someone who really enjoys technology. In addition to being a digital marketer, I have the pleasure of teaching a class at the University of Iowa as an adjunct instructor. I do use both my Mac laptop and my iPad in both of those capacities, and I love them both. But I also have some reservations about them that we can maybe discuss today, and we'll get into that.
Nice. Love it. So I wanted to talk to you about iPad Pros because I feel like I see a lot of people when they use a computer or a laptop, and I keep thinking they're emailing, they're surfing the web, they're using word processors, and maybe doing some light photo editing. Mm-hmm. And I keep thinking to myself, that's everything that an iPad Pro can do. An iPad Pro has so much more to offer than a traditional laptop. So that's kind of the inspiration for why I wanted to talk about this. And wanted you on the show today because you clearly have some insight into all of this. But let's talk about what the current offerings are for iPads, what Apple has going on.
Right. So if you are a user that hasn't looked at the iPad line in recent history, there are some changes that might be a little bit surprising to you. So right now,
Right?
Yeah, right. So right now, Apple kind of divides iPad into two main categories. What they have branded as just iPad. They might even call it the new iPad, if I'm not mistaken. And then they have the iPad Pro.
You're right. The naming changes all the time.
Apple's kind of notorious for bad naming. We've actually had the new iPad potentially more than once, and just iPad several times as well. So that gets a little bit confusing. But set that aside, if you were to walk into an Apple store today, what would you see, Dane?
Okay, let's start from the bottom tier. You would see an iPad mini, which just is what literally is a mini iPad or a large iPhone, depending how you look at it.
Okay.
It's decent, it works, it's pretty, it's small. Then you have just iPad. Mm-hmm. It's just called iPad. Where in previous years, it was called iPad Air, iPad Air 2. It's just iPad.
Right.
It's really thin. It's decently priced, and it does some good stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's really very articulate, but whatever. So iPad Pro has two sizes, 10.5 inch, 12.9 inch. They both have the same specs, more or less, besides the screen size. What constitutes an iPad Pro, Alex, is it has a keyboard, or you can get a keyboard for it, and you can get an Apple Pencil for it.
Okay.
That's how I categorize an iPad Pro.
Sure.
Because those two things aren't compatible with iPad or iPad mini.
Yeah, I mean, there are some third-party offerings, both in terms of a
You're
stylus that you could use and a keyboard, but they're not made by Apple. And particularly in terms of the stylus, it's really not going to measure up to what the iPad Pencil can do.
Right.
I have used several different styli over the course of my iPad career, and the Apple Pencil by far and away blows them all away.
That reminds me of the times because we went to college together.
Right.
We both had iPads back then.
We did.
And we were both using those stupid rubber styli.
Right.
You'd say? Yes. And I could hear you taking notes in class.
Right. That was one of the major annoyances of it. There was a squeak to it. Even if you used there was a metal mesh weave as well that some of them
I remember
used.
that it was this hype about like, what is your stylus made out of? Is it fine rubber or mesh weave? Oh
That's
gosh.
right. That's right. I do think that there are kind of two other things to think about too if you're looking at one of the iPad Pro models versus a lower tier iPad, and that's the internals. They typically have a faster processor and more RAM, which I know we don't need to get into too deeply,
Right.
but that essentially means that you can do more pro level work with it.
Exactly. And that's why on this show today, we're just going to be talking about the Pro models.
Okay.
We're not going to be talking about the minis or iPad.
Right. We're just going to talk about iPad Pro in its various incarnations.
It really is a bad naming system that have going on. So let's get to the first question.
Right.
My burning question. Is the iPad Pro a viable computer replacement? Can you use this at work and not have a laptop?
This feels like a non-answer, but I think the real answer is it depends. And it depends on what you do. I know some people who work primarily in management and administration, and they love going iPad only. I know some people who are kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum, who are really light users, where the primary purpose of their computing device is to send emails, browse the web, and maybe use a few key web apps. So that might be something like Facebook, calendar applications, etc. I say Facebook because, spoiler alerts, I'm a digital marketer, which...
Surprise.
Exactly. So that's sort of, if we look at that niche of users, they can get by with just an iPad. I know that there are some pro-level users, they are frequently individuals who are on podcasts that I listen to, who make a point of using just the iPad. And I think that is because they're largely involved in content production for writing. If you're a writer, I think the iPad is a great tool for you. It's light, it's portable, you can walk around anywhere with it. It's got LTE, which means you can walk away with it and you stay connected, which is really valuable.
I love the LTE thing. So if I were to short answer this question, it's yes. I like an ideal yes. I want my iPad Pro to be my computer replacement. I want the iPad Pro to be everyone's computer replacement. And you just kind of listed it all out right there. I love that you mentioned LTE because when I'm at a cafe, I don't pull out my computer. I pull out my iPad because I never have to think about, I need to find Wi-Fi. I need to turn on my hotspot from my iPhone.
Right.
You get on a Wi-Fi network and it's slow. It doesn't work the way you want it. And that really inhibits how you work.
And that sets aside the security implications of using an unsecured Wi-Fi network that people you don't know are also accessing.
What if you go onto your bank account? What if you're on some other site with sensitive information? I love that I can have a constant, reliable connection on my iPad. And that really enables you to do a lot more. I'd also suggest buying an iPad Pro with LTE. Don't get the Wi-Fi version.
I'm actually Wi-Fi only.
Whoa!
I am a hotspot user, so I use my phone to hotspot for both my computer
I respect that.
and my iPad. Although, tell me this, Dane. So I know that you're a filmmaker and a videographer. We talked about some groups of people that can almost exclusively use the iPad if they so choose. Do you view yourself as fitting in that category?
Back to my original answer. Ideally, yes, the iPad is my only computer, but it can't be by nature of my profession. So I'm a filmmaker, and I try really hard to move everything that isn't video editing onto my iPad. So emails, managing clients, writing, taking notes, literally everything, because it's such a pleasant experience. I love that I can touch the screen, I can hold it, I can detach it from the keyboard, I can take it with me. It's super light. And if I could edit on it, I would. But it's just by nature of video editing, it's just not ideal. You need, a lot more power. You need bigger screens, sometimes multiple screens.
Well, and that sets aside even the limitations of storage and input or output. If you're working with video, you're typically loading really big files into a piece of software.
Totally.
Changing them, editing them, manipulating them, and then exporting that back out, which...
And the only outputs you have on an iPad is the Lightning port.
Right.
And a headphone jack. Despite being a filmmaker and by nature of my profession, I have to have a laptop and a desktop. I make it a point to put everything iPad first or mobile first. Between my phone and my iPad. And this is why, Alex, I love the way I interact with my iPad. It's so natural and I feel more human, for lack of a better way to say that. Because when I'm editing, it's in a dark room. I'm attached to a screen. I feel like a robot. I'm just like clunking away on a keyboard, and I just feel so chained down. So I'm not very flexible. And with the iPad, I'm free. I'm mobile. It's with me wherever I go. The iPad matches my lifestyle, whereas on my editing station, I have to kind of configure myself to its needs.
Right. In terms of adaptability, that is something that becomes very interesting. And I think sometimes that sort of depends just on the person you are and the preferences you have. I love my iPad, but as a digital marketer, I end up using a lot of pretty heavy-duty web apps. Sometimes this is reporting dashboards.
Right.
Sometimes it's advertising platforms like Google AdWords or Facebook Ads Manager. And to be frank, those just don't run very well on the iPad at all. You can try to access them through a web view, but the sophisticated nature of that web page, I think there's probably a lot of JavaScript or other dynamic page elements that just don't display very well on the iPad. And the mobile app equivalents of those things are really meant to be less about production and more about monitoring.
Right.
And so there is some use for it there. And I love being out and about, and I can do this on my iPhone as well, and being able to just check in on the results of a campaign I'm running and seeing if it's performing at a level that I'm comfortable with or that will ultimately result in profitability for our clients. And if it's not, yeah, I can sometimes jump in and make some changes. But my personal preference is actually to use the iPad more as a supplemental computer. And that's where I think it really shines.
Interesting.
So let me tell you briefly about that. I
Tell me.
am in Utah right now, although I currently live in Iowa.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Right. A long way to travel just to be on Tech Yes. I bring that up because I am one of those people who uses two screens all the time when I am working with a computer. And my iPad can serve as a perfectly functional second screen for my laptop. So my current mobile setup is I go somewhere with Wi-Fi, whether it's my parents' home where I'm staying or a cafe, whatever it may be. I drop my laptop down, I plug my iPad into it with a lightning cable, and then I use an app called Duet that will actually let me either mirror my screen to my iPad or, more interestingly, run my iPad as a secondary display.
Yeah, that's a
Very
great
powerful.
app. I love that
it.
app.
Yeah, I love it. The other things that I end up using my iPad for a lot at work is note taking. I actually have a variety of different tools that I'll use for that. I'm one who prefers handwritten notes, much to the chagrin of the people who have to read them after me. But I really feel like I get more out of a meeting when I'm taking handwritten notes. So I will.
I remember that in college. You were very adamant about your handwritten notes. And we all knew about your chicken scratch.
Oh, man. I think I don't know. I love my handwriting personally. It's Chauncey cursive. I'm just misunderstood. But everybody thinks that it's really hard to read. So I definitely can empathize.
I'd like to think that I was able to read your, what did you say, Chauncey? What?
Chauncey cursive. I think. I might be saying that wrong. I'm totally a calligraphy novice, but what do I know? Anyway, so when I'm in meetings, I will be taking handwritten notes, and I'll actually be using a pretty powerful audio app to record the meeting as well. This app is called Ferrite, and it's great because it has a very simple recording infrastructure and interface, but you can use it to edit your audio. It's something that I have edited podcasts in previously when my Mac was out of commission.
This is on your iPad?
This is directly on my iPad.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
You run into that same challenge we were talking about with video editing, where you do have to get, they're not nearly as large as video files, but pretty big MP3s ported to your iPad. Now, if you record directly in the app, they're already there. But I think it's a really powerful tool, and it's one that sort of complements my workflow pretty well. So again, I view the iPad almost as a companion to my Mac and really, really like it for that reason. But as of right now, the iPad itself or some of the different companies that build software that I have to use to get my job done aren't advanced enough for me to be iPad only.
But if those companies or those businesses that were making these apps made, an iPad forward app, one like a fully functional iPad app, could you theoretically be iPad only?
I could.
Would you want to be iPad only?
Yes and no. I think this is where we get into sort of a challenging space because there is this emerging class of computers that are almost short-lived for this world because of their transitional nature, but you don't have to look very far outside of Apple to see some really interesting hybrid options or two-in-one options.
Let's talk about those.
Okay, let's get into it. The one that really, when you say, could I be iPad only? Are you familiar with the Surface Studio, Dane? I feel like this is a filmmaker's dream.
I remember when that commercial came out and it was just like jaw dropped, and it's like really inspirational music. And I've played with one of them briefly.
I love that concept because I'm one who does love to use the touch interface.
Tell me remind me how the Surface Studio looks.
Right. The Surface Studio, imagine an iMac that's maybe a little bit thinner and is placed on a hinge so that if you wanted to, you could pull the bottom of the screen towards you and it would pivot its angle to almost be positioned as a drafting table.
Right.
So I think that's like a 30-ish degree angle away from, the flat plane you've got it placed on. And then you're able to touch and interact with the screen as you would an iPad.
It's like a 27-inch touch screen.
Right. It's computer. A 27-inch iPad. I mean, Microsoft would probably take issue with that description.
But it's running like Microsoft 10 or whatever iOS or whatever OS they're on.
Yeah, it's running Microsoft 10, which supports both touch and more traditional styles of input. I'm one who I have some mild ergonomic challenges. I get some RSI issues if I'm using a traditional keyboard. So I actually use an ergonomic keyboard.
Right.
And I do not enjoy typing on my iPad the same way I do typing on this beautiful ergonomic keyboard that I've purchased. And so that's a limitation for me. That's really tough.
That's interesting. You bring up specifically the Surface Studio. I wouldn't have brought that one up. I hadn't thought about that, but that literally is just like this glorified giant iPad.
Right.
And it does allow you to do certain things kind of best of both worlds in a way, but you can't tote that around. You can't take that to a cafe.
No, you cannot. Though there are other offerings that'll let you do this.
So on the note of Surface Studio, the Surface Pro, that's Microsoft's iPad equivalent.
Yeah, you could call it that. Well, I mean, it is interesting because there are some key differences. It's a true 2-in-1. Maybe not a true 2-in-1, but it is a tablet that can run a traditional operating system, so Windows 10.
Desktop applications.
Right.
Like Photoshop.
And it can also accept input from a mouse or some of those
USB
types of pointers.
ports.
Right. It also has many more ports, et cetera, on it. So it's a little bit different. That's the Surface Pro. That's kind of their mid-tier option. They do also offer the Surface Book, which looks a lot more like a traditional
laptop.
Right. It looks more like a traditional laptop, but it has a detachable screen and it can accept pen input.
That one's a really curious one. So it's a laptop, but it's detached. It has a detachable screen. It doesn't just fold around.
Correct. Yes. I mean, you have the option to fold it around if you so choose, and there are some advantages to that. Some of the more powerful components are actually housed in the keyboard part of that 2-in-1. So when it's plugged in, you get a little bit more processing power, potentially some more RAM, but definitely a longer battery life. So those are kind of just some of the other options that are out there. I'm actually personally kind of interested in the Chromebook space.
The Pixelbook?
Not just the Pixelbook, but
Okay.
Chromebooks in general.
Okay, tell me about those. Why?
Well, yeah. Chromebooks run a totally different operating system than what many of us might be familiar with. It's called Chrome OS. In many ways, it's very similar to the Chrome web browser with two really key additions.
Okay.
One of them is the idea of Chrome apps. So you do sort of have what we would traditionally view as websites built into that operating system as web apps. The more interesting and exciting addition, though, is current generation Chromebooks that have high quality touchscreens are getting support for Android apps. So right now, if you were to go
Whoa.
buy, there's a small selection of these Chromebooks that will support Android apps. The Google Pixelbook is one of them. The Samsung.
I did not know that.
Right, really interesting. So, there's the Pixelbook. Samsung has two that'll do it. I believe it's the Samsung Chromebook Pro and Plus. And then Asus also has one. That's the Asus C302 Flip, I think it is.
That's crazy. You know all these model names.
I have owned each of these computers for a short time before my wife talked me into returning them.
I'm limited to what Apple makes and what only Apple makes.
Right, which, I mean, I think there are a lot of people like you out there who are really heavily invested in the Apple ecosystem, and
Yeah.
that's totally okay. But as someone who sometimes talks about this, or at the very least as someone who frequently advises other people on what kind of computers they should explore.
Your tech support for all your friends.
That's right. Friends, family, coworkers.
Tech, yes.
Right. Tech, yes. Let's make it human. I do sort of feel a responsibility to be aware of those things, and it's just something I'm passionate about. So
Yep.
there are other options out there if you're not quite ready to make the jump to just an iPad. I think we've kind of diverged a little bit from our original path of conversation here.
A little bit, but I like that you were able to go so in depth with all these different options, and I think that's just indicative of there is this movement towards like this mobile touch-based device,
Right.
whether it be a true 2-in-1, it's a laptop and a tablet, like a Surface laptop, or it's interesting you brought up those Chromebooks. So those are interesting in betweens.
Right. They're almost
like
not even a true
web-based.
laptop,
Right.
but it's very interesting. Yeah.
But I think what would it come down to? What would be the decider between should you go Chromebook, should you go 2-in-1, should you go Surface Pro, should you go Surface Tablet, should you go iPad Pro?
Should you go MacBook or
Should
laptop?
you go MacBook? Oh yeah, we can't forget MacBook, MacBook Pro, iMac.
Right. I mean, I think it really does boil down to your computing needs and your preferences. You were talking about how you love the iPad interface so much, and I do too. But if I need to get anything done that involves some serious multitasking, I know the iPad supports it.
It does, and it does a pretty good job at it too.
It does an okay job, but I love having two screens plugged into my computer and then having the ability to run multiple desktops on each. So this is sort of where you can have an instance that you're looking at of different windows, and then you can sort of swipe on your trackpad to the right, and you get a fresh new instance of those windows or perhaps other apps.
Right.
I use that to divide my workspace. So I've got messaging apps in one desktop. I've got advertising campaigns that I'm looking at in another. Maybe I have some reporting dashboards on a third. And just being able to quickly cycle through those things is really valuable to me. And as much as I love the iPad, that's not something it can do yet.
Right. And I don't know.
It's limited by the screen, right? Until we have a 28-inch iPad, we're probably not going to see some of that.
And it's kind of also based on, so your tech profile is I would categorize you as a power user. You want the two screens. You're managing a lot of stuff all at once, and you need some decent computer power in your life.
Right.
And the iPad Pro just can't deliver that. Plus, from an ergonomic standpoint, I wouldn't want to be working 10 hours a day from an iPad.
That's interesting. Tell me about that.
So I just don't think I would want to because, same reasons for you. It's like I need some raw computing power to process video.
Right.
I need the two screens. I want to be looking straight out from my desk with my hands down like a nice 90-degree angle rather than hunched over an iPad. But where the iPad shines is I'm on the couch. I just want to do some casual web surfing.
Right.
I do not take my laptop for that. It is always iPad and or iPhone. So I think let's just recap some tech profiles real quick.
Okay.
I feel like if you were just a content consumer, if your day-to-day job didn't really rely on some heavy computing power or you needed big screens, I feel like that type of person could be fine with just an iPad Pro.
I think if you don't know what processor your computer is running, there's a good chance. Like if you're the kind of person
that's the litmus test.
Right. If you don't think about that, then an iPad can probably meet all of your needs.
Boom. And then I think from there, it's almost kind of like on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
But it really depends. You need to take a profile of what your tech life is and kind of assess, do I need the power? Do I need a bigger screen? Can I just live in a portable lifestyle?
Right.
Or maybe I just need something that's stationary. And if that's the case, a desktop would be better suited.
Well, and I think it's important to remember, too, that this isn't an either or. I love using these two things in tandem, and I already talked about some of the ways I do that. But when I am sort of adopting the profile of someone who is just consuming media, I go to my iPad first. When I'm taking notes and doing those kinds of things, again, it's the iPad. As a professor, I love being able to grade student assignments directly on my iPad. I don't have to print anything. I don't run the risk of losing papers or anything along that, or anything along those lines. I've got everything stored digitally. I can make comments and my students can see them. I also love being able to present from my iPad.
Oh, that's such a beautiful thing.
Right. Well, and with another app I want to call out, there's a great note-taking application called GoodNotes.
I haven't heard of that one.
I think it runs about $8. It's definitely worth the purchase. It has one of the best.
$8?
Right.
Jeez.
That seems expensive this is a different episode.
Sorry, I don't want to derail you.
No, one of the things that is really frustrating is the idea of sustainable app development in the iOS ecosystem, because people do bulk at $8, but
that's
people who pay for Adobe Creative Cloud pay $600 a year without blinking.
That's true. That's a very good point. $8 is kind of, because like even when it's $2.99, I'm thinking like, I'll wait.
Right, but $2.99 is soda with dinner, right? Like it's not much.
That's true. All right, so tell me Tell me more about GoodNotes.
So GoodNotes is this great application that's primarily built around note taking. It has a really nice ink engine, so when you're writing, it feels pretty smooth.
Oh, so you use it with the Apple Pencil?
Of course, always 100% of the time with the Apple Pencil. It does what is called OCR, or optical character recognition. This means that if you write something out in GoodNotes, you can actually drag and drop your handwritten text into another app, and it'll transcribe it into typed text.
Wait. Does it read your handwriting?
Somewhat accurately. Not 100%, but
that's
somewhat.
Impressive it does that.
Right.
I'm going to look that one. I haven't heard about that one.
I'll let you play with it here when we're done recording. It's a great app.
I like it.
One of the things I do love about it, though, is it has a presentation mode where if I build a PowerPoint, or to be frank, it's Google Slides these days. If I build a presentation, I can download it as a PDF, project that up onto a screen or the wall with a projector. And as I'm going through my lecture, I can be taking notes or doing the equivalent of what used to be writing things on the board directly on my PowerPoint slides or my Google slides.
Using GoodNotes?
Using GoodNotes. The students
Wow.
can see this in real time. And then at the end of the lecture, I can post my slide deck with my handwritten notes. Now, this most recent semester, I didn't do that too much, the actual posting of it. But it was a great way for me to remember some of the things I had said in class, particularly if I changed a deadline or if I committed to provide some additional examples after the fact. I had the notes right there. The class had seen me write them, and I was able to consult them later and move on.
I'm glad you bring up this example, Alex, because the way that you use this in your classroom, because would you be able to do the same thing with the same type of ease with a laptop or a 2-in-1 or a hybrid or whatchamacallit in between or whatever? There's something to be said about the iPad, the way it's designed, the touch screen, the Apple Pencil that just works so phenomenally. And because the way you describe that, it's like you probably don't think twice about how you're just using it.
Right. And there's kind of two things there. A laptop, this would be near impossible. I can't think of a way that I would want to do this with just my Mac. I just don't see that. To your point, though, I have done this with a Samsung Chromebook Pro, and the Samsung Pen is actually pretty good. It's not as good as the Apple Pencil, that is true. But in terms of it being a totally usable stylus, yes. Now, one of the things that we haven't really touched on is the different app ecosystems that exist for these products. And that's where I think this actually gets the most challenging. Full disclosure, I'm much less aware of the Android app space than I am the iOS app space.
Likewise.
But I haven't seen, and I have looked, I haven't seen anything as good as GoodNotes in the Android App Store. The closest thing to me would be OneNote by Microsoft. And I do use, that's available on iOS as well, and I use it. But it doesn't handle PDFs as cleanly as GoodNotes does. So that's sort of a shift or a difference that you just need to consider. That's kind of a niche or a niche discussion, but that's something that I do love about the iPad.
The app offerings for each ecosystem is important, and that kind of will make one machine sing over another. Mm-hmm. With iOS, you get a high quality type of app with iOS.
Sometimes.
Usually, hopefully. But you bring up a good point. Like the Android ecosystem is also great, and it depends. It kind of goes back to the conversation earlier, where it depends what type of apps you need to use on your device.
Right.
If it's a desktop type of app, or there's not a great mobile app, you're kind of forced to go desktop route.
Exactly.
But back to why I say yes, I want my iPad to be my only computer. Ideally, it's like everything should be mobile first. It's just a beautiful thing when you can be teaching and you're just using your iPad, taking notes, switching between slides. Or I can just pull this out at a cafe and I can start doodling and use it as my notebook. There's something about the design I think that's just really appealing. So, Alex, I want to ask you, will an iPad Pro be your next computer?
It'll be my next supplemental computer.
Okay, that's good enough. That's good enough. Cool. Well, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Dan. It was good to be here.
Tech Yes is where tech makes sense. We produce weekly content, videos, and podcasts to make the tech world a little more human. If you want to support the show, share this podcast with your friends. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. This show is supported by patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/techyes.